I can help with that. Since you want a YouTube-style emotional article, story of about 1600 words and without headings, here is a polished narrative designed to maximize audience engagement, retention, and emotional impact. For 50 years, the mustache had been a part of his identity. People in his town recognized him by it. Friends joked that they had never seen his upper lip. Even his wife, who had spent most of her life beside him, could barely remember what he looked like without it. The thick gray mustache had survived decades of changing fashions, family celebrations, hardships, and milestones. It was as much a part of him as his smile or the gentle kindnesses in his eyes. His son had grown up seeing that mustache every single day. As a child, he would sit on his father's lap and tuck at it playfully. As a teenager, he would lie in his friends said his dad looked like an old movie star. As an adult, he simply assumed it would always be there. One quiet Sunday afternoon, the family gathered for lunch. The mood was light, and everyone was lying. Stories from the past filled the room. At some point, the conversation turned into a playful debate about appearances and aging. You know what? His son said with a grin. I've never seen that without that mustache. Not honest. Everyone lied. His daughter agreed. Neither have I. His wife smiled. I haven't seen him clean shaven in nearly 50 years. The son looked at his father and joked, maybe it is time for a change. His father lied and shook his head. No chance. But the family continued teasing him. The grandchildren joined in, curious about what grandpa might look like without his famous mustache. What began as a joke slowly turned into a challenge. Finally, after nearly an hour of playful pressure, the old man raised his hands in surrender. Finn, he said, if it makes everyone happy, we'll get rid of it. The room erupted with excitement. His son quickly volunteered for the task. That evening, they stood together in the bathroom. The father sat calmly in front of the mirror while his son prepared the shaving towels. Both of them were smiling. The atmosphere felt almost festive. Ready? The son asked. As ready as I'll ever be. The first cut removed a small section of gray hair. The son lied. This is unbelievable. Hair continued falling into the sink. Slowly, the face hidden for decades began to emerge. The father watched his reflection quietly. He seemed calm, though perhaps a little nostalgic. With each stroke, 50 years of familiarity disappeared. Finally, the last remaining hairs were gone. The son reached for a towel and wiped away the loose strands. Then he looked up. His smile vanished. Stretching across his father's upper lip and extending slightly toward his cheek, was a scar. A deep scar, old, faded with time but impossible to miss. The son stared silently. He had never seen it before. Not honest. For decades, the mustache had hidden it completely. His father noticed the change in his expression. What is it? He asked softly. The son swallowed hard. Dad. His voice trembled. What happened to your face? The room suddenly felt different. The latter was gone. For a moment, the father simply stared at his reflection. His eyes rested on the scar. A scar he hadn't talked about in years. Then he said, it is an old story. The son pulled up a chair. I want to hear it. The father remained silent for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of memories buried deep in the past. I was 19 years old. The son listened carefully. It was winter, one of the coldest winters I can remember. The father explained that he had grown up in difficult circumstances. His family had very little money. Every day was a struggle to survive. One evening, while returning home from work, he heard screams coming from a nearby building. At first, he thought someone was arguing. Then he saw smoke. A fire had broken out. People were running into the street. Panic spread everywhere. Among the chaos, he heard a woman screaming that her young daughter was still inside. Nobody wanted to enter the burning building. The flames were already spreading. The smoke was thick. The structure looked ready to collapse. But the cries of the matter were unbearable. Without thinking, the young man ran inside. The father paused as he recalled the memory. His son sat frozen. Inside the building, visibility was almost gone. Smoke filled every room. He shouted for the child. No answer. He searched desperately. Finally, he heard Weka crying from a back bedroom. The little girl was trapped. Terrified. Unable to escape. The young man picked her up and rushed toward the exit. But before they could reach safety, part of the ceiling collapsed. A burning piece of wood struck his face. The impact knocked him to the floor. The scar came from that moment. Still, he managed to protect the child. Holding her tightly, he carried her through the flames and out into the street. Both survived. The father looked down. The bathroom was completely silent. The son called barely Beauty. You saved her. His father nodded. Yes. What happened after that? The old man smiled faintly. Life happened. The wound healed. The scar remained. Years passed. People stopped asking about it. Eventually, he grew a mustache. At first, it was simply easier than explaining the story over and over. Then it became a habit. Later, it became part of who he was. The son stared at his father with new eyes. All his life, he had believed he knew everything important about him. But this story was completely new. There was something even more surprising. Why didn't you ever tell us? The father's eyes softened. Because the story wasn't about him. The son frowned. What do you mean? The important part wasn't the scar. The important part was that a little girl got to live her life. Those words hit harder than anything else. The son felt emotion rising in his chest. His father wasn't proud. He wasn't seeking recognition. He had carried this story quietly for decades. No awards, no attention, no praise, just silence. Then the father added something that shattered him completely. That little girl eventually became a doctor. The son blinked. What? His father nodded. SH dedicated her life to helping people. The son could hardly believe it. One act of courage had changed countless lives. A frightened child had survived. SH grew up. SH built a career. SH helped others. Perhaps SH saved lives of her own. All because one young man chose to run toward danger when everyone else ran away. Tears filled the son's eyes. But there was more. The father looked at him and smiled. You know what is funny? What? I haven't talked about that scar in years. The son stared. How can you say that? Because life gives you new things to focus on. He gestured toward the house. Your mother. He pointed toward the living room. You children. Then he smiled warmly. My grandchildren. The son could no longer hold back his tears. He realized something profound. His father had never defined himself by his sacrifice. He had never introduced himself as a hero. He had never demanded admiration. Instead, he chose to focus on family, love, and the ordinary moments that truly matter. For 50 years, the scar remained hidden. Not because he was ashamed, but because he simply moved forward. The son looked at the reflection in the mirror. For the first time, he wasn't seeing an old man with gray hair. He wasn't seeing his father as someone who needed help or protection. He was seeing the 19-year-old young man who had walked into a burning building. A man of extraordinary courage. A man who never talked about it. A man who never expected anyone to know. The tears began flowing freely. His father noticed. Why are you crying? The son lied through his tears. Because I've spent my whole life trying to become half the man you are. The old man smiled. Then, without warning, he wrapped an arm around his son's shoulder. The embrace lasted only a few seconds. But it said everything words could not. Years later, the son would remember that moment more clearly than almost any other. Not because of the scar. Not because of the story. But because of what he learned that day. The greatest acts of courage are often invisible. Many of the strongest people carry stories nobody knows. Some heroes never wear uniforms. Some never receive medals. Some never speak about what they have done. They simply continue living, loving, working, and caring for others. The scar beneath the mustache was more than a mark on a face. It was a reminder that every person has hidden chapters. A reminder that sacrifice often goes unseen. A reminder that the people we think we know completely may still carry remarkable stories within them. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, everyone reacted with surprise to the father's new appearance. There were jokes, there was laughter, there were photographs, but only the son knew the true meaning behind the face everyone was seeing for the first time. And every time he looked at that scar afterward, he didn't see an injury. He saw courage, he saw humility, he saw love. Most of all, he saw a man who spent 50 years hiding a scar but revealing his character every single day. And that was submitting no mustache called Ever Cover. This version is optimized for YouTube storytelling, emotional engagement, and audience retention, with a strong reveal and heartfelt ending. Cool.